I'm Lisa Janicki-Hinchliff. I'm pleased to be here to facilitate this session. Mostly my goal is to get us kicked off on time and then close on time because, of course, we all have the closing session to come to as well. We're going to go just one person out of order, so we're going to go ahead and let Michael start. That's not the, I bet I didn't say your name right, I'm sorry. Because he has a plane to catch, but then we'll return to the order that's in the program. So we're gonna do all four presentations in a row, so we at least get all the content done, and then we'll return to questions, and you'll have an opportunity to ask questions of any of the speakers at that point. So let's go ahead and get started.
Okay. Thank you. So I'm here to talk about the holy grail of off-campus access. I've heard that word mentioned before. Who of you in this audience uses Google Mail, Gmail? Can you see show of hands? Okay. Who knows what subscriber links are in Google Scholar? Okay. Okay. Who uses Google in general to surf the web? Okay, that gives me an indication of how hostile the audience may be or not be. Because this is basically about a collaboration between Highwire and Google. The topic of my call is called CASA. It's a neat acronym we came up with which stands for Campus Activated Subscriber Access. And I'm going to explain to you how it works and why it's wonderful. We, of course, all know about the problems with off-campus access. We know from researchers that we interviewed that it's really a major pain point in their daily work. If scholars, and I assume the same thing with students, cannot get to something without too many hurdles, they're not going to get there. They give up. There are, of course, a few alternatives currently in place for off-campus access. Proxy servers, Shibboleth, OpenAthens. There are even some new initiatives on the market. But still, very often, they require manual steps, logging in, using a username or password. Sometimes you need to do that for both Shibboleth and OpenAthens, or you need some knowledge of how it works. As a result, people use Sci-Hub, ResearchGate, academia.edu. And another, I think, a very important point, both for libraries and publishers, that illegitimate usage is not recorded. So Highwire came up with an alternative together with Google Scholar. CASA provides seamless off-campus access. It builds on the existing subscriber links that Google Scholar uses to send people who search in Google Scholar to the article. I think that's a big caveat here, that Google Scholar indexes so far article literature and sometimes some edited volumes. What then happens is that a token is created. I'll get to that into more detail a little bit later, and that token is used for authentication or authorization. There is no configuration required, nothing needs to be installed, there's no new technology needed. The only thing that needs to happen is that a publisher needs to enable CASA on their platform. CASA is now available, we piloted it, and all the publishers that are on our platforms can use it, and I believe Project Muse has enabled CASA. Another thing is that user privacy is protected. Really the only thing that is recorded is someone's affiliation on a specific device or someone's Gmail profile. So there basically there's three parts in this concept. It's recording the affiliation. That needs to happen on campus, so within the IP range of the campus. then propagating that affiliation once the user is off campus, at home, Starbucks, and enabling the access to make that part work. This is, by the way, how subscriber links look like in a Google Scholar search. We know that for referrals, people coming to our content on our platform, about 50% comes from people using Google, about 10% using Google Scholar. Nevertheless, we saw that those publishers who are using Casa have a 30% increase in usage. Now, I assume that's something that libraries would want, as well as publishers. I will now explain to you in several steps. So we have Jeff, and Jeff uses Google Scholar on campus at an institution to look for an article. Yeah. Then Google Scholar on its own servers, it's almost like a proxy server, records the affiliation. This device, this Google profile, belongs to this institution. Then, when Jeff returns to Google Scholar off campus to look for literature, a Casa token is sent to the platform, whatever journal it is that the Scholar wants to have access to. That token is decrypted by the platform, and so it's recognized that this person belongs to a certain university and has access rights. And by the way, this access means access to everything that you can find in Google Scholar, to which the institution is subscribed. This doesn't look as neat as it did before. So that's the last step, that the access is enabled. So it's authenticated, the authorization happens, and this usage is recorded and will show up in usage reports as counter-compliant usage. Now, the benefits of this are very clear. So it can be used from any device. A phone, iPad, laptop. That device has to be taken to campus, of course, and used. It says reduce friction, but really there is no friction whatsoever. You will not notice that anything happens. You just get access. It works instantaneously. It's counter-compliant. We have recorded a significant increase in usage. And I believe there are plans to broaden Casa to go beyond Google Scholar to Google. And of course, monitoring is built in from the start to see if there is any misuse. The token, the affiliation token that gets created, has to be refreshed every 25 minutes. I get signs that I'm, and I need to catch a plane. So this really, in a nutshell, is Casa. Publishers need to talk to Google Scholar to enable this on their platforms, and it will work for you. If you have any questions, my email is there. Feel free to write me. And if I cannot answer the question, I will make sure you get it answered. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Let's turn it over to Phil.
Okay, everyone, I'm going to put the lightning in lightning talk. Okay, I'm Phil White. I am the Earth Science and Environment Librarian at the University of Colorado Boulder. I'm really excited to talk to you all today. I have this project that I'm really excited about, and I hope you're interested in. I'm going to talk to you all about citation studies, citation analysis, and streamlining citation studies using some data mining. All of this kind of started when I first started at CU about 18 or 19 months ago. I saw a talk from a couple of my colleagues, Gabby Wiersma and Jennifer Knievel. They were talking about a study they did where they took our humanities faculty and looked at their publications and books they published and looked at their citations and checked them against our catalog to see if we had everything they needed. Basically a collection assessment. And that was the first time I'd ever been exposed to a citation study like that, and I started thinking about it myself and came to like this question, like, how would I do this? How would I do it efficiently? I kind of took this, having no prior knowledge of how something like that worked and what the methods were, I kind of like took this fresh methodological approach toward doing this. On Wednesday, I was at a talk and someone was talking about open access metrics and how we gauge open access use. And it was brought up that citation analysis would be really great and really useful, except that it takes forever to do. And it can take months to collect all that data. And you have to have your eyes on it. And I'm here to say it doesn't have to be that way. We can actually do it really fast. So I've been working on new methods and thinking about the sciences, which is my kind of subject area. The first thing you think of when you think of citations would be Web of Science. And Web of Science provides cited references for us. When I started poking around in Web of Science, I quickly realized that there was no way for me, you can extract some like CSVs and some files from Web of Science, but there's not really a way to do it efficiently, especially in a way that can scale up to like really big. And so I turned to the Web of Science API. If you're not familiar with the Web of Science API, it's a subscription service. My institution subscribes to it. If you're not familiar with API, an API is an application programming interface. It's basically a way for software applications to communicate with each other, exchange information. Like a really common example would be like if you have a weather app on your phone and you look at the weather on it, that app is probably using the National Weather Service API to pull that data in, right? So that's the basics of an API. The Web of Science API runs on XML. It's a SOAP API. I'm not going to get into the details of that. The basic thing to know is that it runs on XML. It will give you XML data. So the API, it's not a website or anything like that. There's no user interface. It's just a URL. And the way it works is that you send a message to the URL in XML format. The content of that message is your query, right? And it will send you a message in return with your search results. And I like to say that I've had this kind of like long-running, year-long love affair where I've been exchanging love letters with the Web of Science API. And so how do I do this? How do we send these letters back and forth? So there are some kind of easy tools that you can, if you all want to start experimenting with APIs, that you can turn to. I started using something called Postman. It's free, it's available on the web, it works in your browser, and you can basically just kind of construct a query, an API query, and send it. And that's kind of how I learned how to do it, and that's kind of how I figured out all the parameters needed for accessing the Web of Science API. And then I turned to, well, how would I do this in mass? Because doing it with like Postman or something like that would be like I could send one query at a time, but I want to send like lots of queries in a short amount of time. And so I turned to Python, is what I did. So I constructed some Python scripts that could do all this in an automated way. You could also do it with something like Ruby or R or a bunch of other programming languages too, if you know someone or you are savvy with any of those. So I started this test case, and this was kind of just to prove that I could do it and try to figure out how to manage the workflow. Used the geological sciences faculty. Since I'm the earth sciences librarian, geology is in my subject area. I looked at all of the publications of our faculty in geosciences for the past 5 years. I downloaded those from Symplectic Elements. My institution has a subscription to Symplectic Elements. It was really easy for me to just download all of our publication data in a spreadsheet. If you don't have Symplectic Elements, that's okay. You could actually still do it with the Web of Science API with a couple more steps added, and would also be pretty straightforward. All of those faculty publications came to me with a Web of Science accession number, which is important. I needed that to do my query. And I ended up with 421 publications. So over 5 years, the geology faculty at CU had 421 publications indexed by Web of Science. And with that in hand, that initial data set in hand, I worked on a Python script. All my scripts are available. I asked if you use them, please acknowledge me. I don't have a README up on my GitHub yet, so I'm going to put a README up so other people can kind of figure out how to do it. But all my scripts are available, and they're up there. So basically, the script opens up a CSV. That CSV has all of those Web of Science accession numbers listed. It inserts that accession number into an XML message, sends the XML message to the Web of Science API. I get back data in response, and as they're coming in, they're all appended into one giant XML file. So for this kind of case study, I wound up with 24,448 citations. If that's not the largest citation study ever, my next one will be, I promise. And by the way, that took about 9 minutes. So we're talking about reducing this time for data collection down from like weeks or months with lots of students taking and cutting and pasting and bringing it down to just 9 minutes. So it's literally like cuts the time down in a very dramatic way. I cleaned all my data in OpenRefine. When I went to match my data with our library holdings data, basically the idea is to do a data join, which you could do in like some stat packages and things like that, and I joined based on journal names. To do that, though, there's a lot of cleaning involved because a lot of these citations come back just like they're published. So you get things like j.geophys.res instead of Journal of Geophysical Research. Luckily, OpenRefine has some really nice clustering tools that let you basically automate that too. And then I did my data join also using the reconciliation tools in OpenRefine. So the results of that kind of test case were that in terms of geology collection, we had 92% of the serials cited 5 times or more, which is pretty good. Kind of looked at the 80-20 rule and found that actually in our case, 80% of all the citations went to just 10% of the items cited, and 50% of all those went to just 1% of all the items cited. So really identified a core collection. Also discovered some gaps in our library collection. Some of those like really highly cited things we actually didn't have, and we didn't realize it. So we saw some problems locally there. So like I mentioned, identified a core collection, but the opposite is true as well. So in the future, if we have like cuts to our budget and we need to make some serial cuts, I know exactly how many times everything's been cited, and I could do it again really quickly to figure out, in the future how to make those informed decisions about our collection. Next step. So I'm definitely not done. I'm just getting started with this, and I'm going to keep refining my methods here. I'm very close to matching on ISSNs, which would streamline it even more. It will speed things up a lot. Also, there's possibilities to integrate other APIs into the workflow, where basically I could send it through Web of Science, pull the data out of Web of Science, send it through OCLC, send it through Crossref, and like get it all down in probably like one script, so it could be done like super fast. In this kind of test case, it took me about 40 or 50 hours total to do this big citation study. And if anyone has ever done a citation study before in this room, you know how long it takes. I actually think my goal would be to get it down to 1 day. So a whole thing, which is cool because it would turn this from being like, a study that we do every few years to being like, it's just a regular occurring assessment method for our collection. Currently, I'm looking at new science faculty that have started at CU since the fall. I've already got all their citations, basically trying to figure out, do we have things when science faculty come to our university? A lot of times they're bringing in a whole new area of research. It's never happened. Do we have what they need? Probably not, so we're figuring that out. And then we're going to scale this up, do a large-scale citation analysis for everything in the sciences at CU. So we're talking really big. Future work, I'd like to do some cross-institutional comparison too. I think there's a lot of things we could really learn about how we manage our collections between our peer institutions. And question mark, I think these new methods kind of open up all sorts of doors, and I don't even know what all those doors are now. If you have ideas, I'm absolutely willing to listen. But there's all sorts of analysis we could do with just these easy methods. So the implications of this, is this a revolution for citation analysis and collection assessment? I think so. One, there's the speed element, but with that extra efficiency gains, we can do this on a huge scale. So it's very scalable. If I can do it by myself, in a few hours, what can we do with teams of people? Yeah, we can do a lot. So that's what I have, and I hope you all enjoyed it. All my scripts are available online. I have a larger presentation that I did just on this kind of test case. You all got the very condensed version, but if you want to see all my results from that, that's available online here. I'm sure you'll see my slides later, so check it out. Thanks, everyone.
Great, thank you, Phil. Not only the lightning talk, but the enthusiasm. That's fantastic. Okay, and I was about to say a different person's name, so instead she'll say her own name when she gets up.
I didn't fall. Hello, I'm Christina Goiter. I'm the Electronic Resources Librarian at K-State. Whoa, I'm short, I'm sorry. Is that good? Better? Okay. I'm Christina Goiter. I'm the Electronic Resources Librarian at Kansas State University. Whoa. Okay, we're good. Kansas State University is an R1 located in Manhattan, Olathe, and Salina, Kansas. In recent years, the Kansas State University Libraries became aware of an increase of activities putting its access to electronic resources in jeopardy. The terms of use agreed upon between the vendor and the library are on confidential documents, but the user community and library staff needed to somehow become aware of permissions. So what we did was collaborate between, I'm the ERL, the Electronic Resources Librarian, and I handle the vendor relationships and agreements. We had metadata librarians administering the ILS and IT administrators on the proxy. So we re-examined the toolkit and provision of license information services. So I'll be discussing the now public-facing terms of use documentation and back-end system accommodations designed to guide research practices in ways that alleviate the problem. So, let me just, 3 years ago, our library experienced an 85% jump in vendor communications to the library suspecting activity in violation of terms of use. It was a bit scary because that's when I came on the job. This activity ranged from external forces to internal misunderstanding of the access the library provides to its community. I really wanted to put on there's this Charlie Brown cartoon that has, oh, everything at the library is free, right? I couldn't, but that's one of the things we encounter now that things are becoming more electronic is that it's on the internet, it looks free. So 3 common reasons for a breach include systematic download, unauthorized crawling, and third-party access. Some of these scenarios are related to a land-grant university function with overseas partnerships, public outreach, and the scale of a national profile. But while we cannot prevent all malicious attacks, we can educate the user community to avoid activity that may infringe current terms. So under the prior electronic resource personnel's experience, only a few incidents of suspicious activity were reported per year. And these reports draw information technology investigations with university staff becoming aware of the related credentials, compromised or not. So decidedly, many of the details are kept confidential to the university staff involved directly with the resolution in order to protect patron privacy. With so much of the licensing work remaining confidential to my department, there's only limited information coming out to capture the attention of public services personnel who typically educate information literacy and library research methods. I am in a cubicle behind a secured door. I don't have that interaction with people. Furthermore, they needed information about how a breach is defined in the different scenarios that play out as a result of university research. Accordingly, measures were taken to reevaluate the distribution of information and give it a more public face to something that's usually closed behind the auspices of technical services. So I don't expect you to read that. This is on the The image below is actually my ticketing system and the resolutions to it, which you can find on our repository. So historically, my department consolidated our vendor communications and access issues under a general email account. Instead of John Doe, since we're Hale Library, we call it Jane Hale. This helped to streamline coordinated response activity with the library, especially concerning holdings and rights language. In 2015, we changed it to the emails and vendors going, or the vendor communications going to the email, but the reported issues within our staff going to a ticketing system. We use Redmine, and we separate the tickets between personnel, so someone handling ebooks, someone handling license language, someone handling the metadata. What this has done is it's made the Jane Hale tickets, we're able to see not only access issues, but also we can encounter problem areas of patron use before it might instigate a breach. We can hear from the patron, oh, I got blocked. Well, what were you doing? And then we can educate them through the ticket in the email, or reaching out to the faculty member for maybe negotiated new terms for the project. We also have database breach tickets. In early 2017, we collaborated on a ticketing form that would better document the process of investigation and resolution behind the scenes. We had everything in email history before, but we needed to see who were repeat offenders that would go to the dean. We needed to see what were patterns that were happening. So what we did was we also applied an institutional policy condemning repeat offenders, but we were able to document evidence through the system. I put in all of the vendor information, the logs that they send us, and then it goes on to IT security, but everything gets documented in one place. Oh, it works. So many of you use SpringShare, I'm assuming? Yeah. So SpringShare is pretty great because you can customize something for a local use from general information out in the public, or you can transfer something to be used nationwide. We have a copyrighted and licensed resource guide in the works. It's under review by our faculty right now. We worked on that this summer with the person in charge of copyright at our library. And I explained best practices for using licensed content in the different research and publication scenarios. And I wanted to answer common questions and directions for use. Of course, with licensing, that's really hard to do to make a LibGuide about, because every license, if you've looked at one, is like 2 to 60 pages of maybe, don't do it. But in this scenario, you know, it's very unique. So I can't just go out and say, you know, everything applies to this practice. Another thing that I'm working on right now, I have to review about 450 more licenses to do this, but a text and data mining guide. That's a pretty big trend right now in licensing, is to be able to provide this information about what could be potentially a problem behavior with some databases, but promote others' use just by telling people what can be done with it. All right, tweaks in back-end tools. This is the stuff I have links to all of these tools in the website. It's on, to the websites for these tools in the slideshow that I've uploaded to the Charleston website. First off, as you may know, EZProxy has server caps. We first applied caps to the databases that had problems with malicious attacks or systematic download in the past. And what we did was we extended those caps to other resources, but I became the point person to say if someone wanted to bring up the cap for a special project, I would relate that to IT to do that. It's pretty quick to do. Another thing that we had was, this is cool. Our IT people, I cannot take the credit for this, but Julie Bell on our Library Information Technology Services team really deserves a lot of credit for this. She made a parameter to detect the Sci-Hub transactions. Sci-Hub is a common offender of our scientific resources. We had our engineering database, the most prominent one, shut down for a month this past year. So it's a repository claiming open access, but it used pirated licensed content through compromised university credentials. We would shut down access for a user, another one would come up. It was like bing, 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 bing. They had harvested credentials of us. So it's one of our vendors, one of our scientific vendors, experienced this so many times that they actually run technology that detects the transactions being made on our server. So what we did was our system administrator, Julie Bell, created a parameter on the EZProxy server to detect their activity so that before they even notified us and shut off our access preventatively, we could shut down the user before it was shut down, the access was shut down campus-wide. So the EZProxy server caps that I discussed before were not always effective for this scenario because Sci-Hub transactions aren't usually a systematic download. They could be something small, like a one-off journal article. So this was a way, by running this spider, we were able to see this happen before the vendor. Okay, here are two websites for you to become very familiar with. Beginning in 2016, our proxy server administrator began to update a weekly blacklist file in EZProxy to block problem addresses, IP addresses. GitHub has this on their website. IP address blacklist maintained by Ball State's librarian PR Butler is regularly updated and found to be very reliable, although we occasionally add other problem IPs in a text file on our end. Swatchdog is an open source project monitoring log patterns for unusual activity, alerting system administrators to block IPs. And the vendors will give you the IP address that's the problem. So you'll be able to match it to the list and see if that's what's going on. Another thing that happened this past spring was that our metadata librarians configured our instance of Alma to have select license terms appearing in the search results. So we have our interlibrary loan use, we have our remote access use, we have walk-in permissions, scholarly sharing. One of the things that it doesn't have is data mining rights. So that's the reason why we had to do the guide, is because you can choose from the list in the licensing module what you can activate in the Primo on the vendor side, but it's, if the term isn't there for you to define, you can't add it. So, as evident in some of the concerns on public services, I wanted to make information publicly available, but to only convey what's expressed by a license, no more, no less. In both of the online research guides, I emphasize the need to consult with users before beginning special projects. And by making patrons more aware of contractual concerns through the library's outreach and calculated facilitation of licensed resource discovery, the user community is expected to carry more mindfulness to its wide array of research. A crucial step in protecting a library from a breach of electronic resource terms is to educate the patrons and library personnel what those terms are. Thank you. Sure.
And finally, we'll move forward with Jeffrey.
Yeah, who is a Mac person, and I haven't touched a PC in years, so I would never be able to get the presentation up here, I'm afraid.
Are you just the facts?
Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Welcome.
I can do it from here, just play it from now.
Now you go to this guy.
Yeah, and then you just hit it.
Arrow. Where is it?
I see, right, that one?
This.
Oh, okay, how
Yeah.
weird. Why isn't it the middle one? See, that's why I don't use PCs. All right, well, oh, that didn't work at all. Oh, well, it's first the cheesy animation, but it's not as good as the cat. That cat one is really cool. So content is king, but data is queen. So don't mess with the queen, that's all I can say. So one thing that I want to talk about is, like, I first started with data analytics. I'm going to cover data analytics in 10 minutes, which is funny in itself. But one of the really extraordinary things is that I started looking at like ALA publications, data analytics for libraries and things like that. And I found that this stuff is really serious. You know, like it's deadly. And I thought, I really want to go back to basic principles. So that's what this is about. All I can cover in 10 minutes is really basic principles. You're not going to learn how to do multivariate analysis or anything in 10 minutes anyway. So one of the things I want to talk about is, where do you start? Like, before you analyze data, you want to collect it. So the first thing that I looked at was the quantified self movement. Now, this is simply, the entrepreneurs got behind this. You know, it's like tracking everything that's really sort of everyday activities. Like, well, in my case, it was walking. So I did a lot of tracking of my walking for a lot of outdoor exercise. And this is just for my iPhone, sorry. Now I don't know how to go back. Okay, so you can see that this is just raw data. These are uncooked numbers, but that's what you start out with. You start out with just, okay, basic data, like how many steps you took, what distance you went in a particular time frame. And then as you begin to collect the data, you get more information as time goes on. You can see days where I did absolutely nothing. It looks like I sat in a chair all day. There's little dots at the bottom, which is kind of what I did. I was like that cat sitting at my computer typing away. Did you notice how that, it's animated, just the arms, the rest of it's like a still photo. Okay, so you can't manage what you don't measure. So this is really about data analytics and acquisition. So I manage the order services department, or acquisitions, at Emory University. So when I got there about 6 years ago, I looked at what data we were collecting and what we were reporting up. And oh, this is more, sorry, I cut this slide thing down for 10 minutes. This talks about every day, like when you go to sleep at night, you think, well, am I going to track that? But people actually do. They're really interested in their sleep patterns. And if in this case, somebody had alcohol, the one on the right. So when you have alcohol, your patterns are really weird. So then you can see, and then you can look at it over a month and see how much you drank and how much it affected your sleep patterns. So, you know, you can track everything. But what I wanted to do when I went to acquisitions there, and I had five staff members who were primarily acquisitions people who do a lot of the operational tasks and count. So I said, well, what are they counting? And I found that the traditional metrics for acquisitions are just like, this is applicable to any library operation. I mean, the way that they're traditionally counted is pretty straightforward. I mean, we count the orders that we place, the orders we receive, the rush orders that we fill, things like that. And they're very standard and they're necessary, but there was so much hidden work. There was a lot more that people were doing that was just not revealed in those statistics at all. And all the numbers would end up in the cataloging department, and they'd get all the credit, you know, for all the numbers of everything that were added. So I guess what I want to do is to see that there are people behind the statistics. What are we counting? And could we count more? Could we count differently? I mean, in addition to the basic ones, you're not going to get away from the standard metrics in libraries unless you change professions. But I mean, they're pretty basic. So I want to just, this is a very famous, instead of me just saying this, other people think this too, so that's why I put this quote up here. So it's not just me that thinks people are behind the counts. So, you know, so what I said before is to do data analytics before you get there, and you want to analyze data in the first place because you have a manager and a library director and supervisors who want to know what your output is and what its meaning is to the organization. So basically, just remember the people that are doing the counting. When I say, well, like I said, there were 5 people doing stuff, and I was counting what they were doing. I was counting other material stuff, and we had to decide what was really worth it. So we wanted to take a different look at what we've been doing. I know you can't read this, but this is the traditional metrics, which is what I mentioned before. Boy, I can't get straight on this mic. I'm sorry. Can you hear me consistently, or am I going in and out like a really bad radio reception? Okay. So these are, can anybody read that? Anyway, this is what they look like, and this is what scares me, because I'm just not I'm like totally not mathematical at all. This was the basics metrics that we still do, and this covers all month by month, and it gives you the annual figures and everything. And it's pretty elaborate. Again, orders placed, related work, it reveals a little bit more than those basic metrics that I mentioned before. But what I did was I took some of those quarterly things, and this is what you get out of standard data tools that people use. I mean, these are not real pretty or anything, but this goes back a long way, and it shows those high-level firm orders placed each year, firm orders placed for each of the same thing for approvals, the same thing for the rush fulfillment, and a bunch of other activities. So this is a list which may be a little more readable. I don't know, you tell me in the back of the room, but okay, you can't read it. But the related work were things like search but it wasn't available, duplicates, claims, cancellations by vendor, cancellations by library, and stuff like that. We still didn't think that that was covering everything we did. So I started something on a Google spreadsheet where we started tracking all the things that every one of the 5 people were doing. The person who did approvals, she was going by foreign language approvals, domestic vendors, what kind of approvals they were. We started to count individually by date. So she would just track everything she received, and we would flag it by the type of material it was. So if it was, the foreign approvals could go in a range of different countries and different languages. And we also have all of our cataloging on receipt that we started to do and acquisitions began to be counted. And we started to look at our media purchasing and DVDs, CDs, and all that because we have a really big media program at Emory. So we decided to parse it out more. So without getting, this sort of gives you an exact breakdown of what we started to count and what was called the tracker, separate from that statistical spreadsheet. And it looks something like this. It would start with the date of that activity or that task was being done, and then records that were loaded, errors, things that went straight to the stacks from approval shelf ready or firm shelf ready, and things that fell out. It seems odd that these things weren't counted, but that was just happening. People were just doing handoffs, but no one was ever keeping track. But that always involved the work of more than one person, so we wanted to make sure that that was covered. So then we got, does anybody have access to Tableau? It's really just a tool, a couple of people. Well, it's really expensive, and at Emory they bought it, and then I had to sort of break in under the, in the back door, so to speak. I went to the data store person who had access and gave her all my spreadsheets and said, try to use this. Now, this session is not about tools because there's any number of tools. Some of them are free, and this is just this really elaborate thing. You can't, it crunches a spreadsheet and just does all kinds of weird stuff with it. And over in the far right column, there are all these checkboxes. You can turn them on and off and say, add this, subtract that, to put all this in. But it's kind of what you have to do mentally. It's like, it doesn't really do it for you. It's a great tool, but it's like, I really didn't find it all that useful because I found that you have to sit down and think about your data. You have to understand your own data and decide what you wanted, how you want to present it. And that's really the analysis part. So don't get intimidated by books on data analytics, and don't get intimidated by these sophisticated tools, because I'm sorry, I went back again. They're not all that great. It does things like this. It'll take, like I said, I want to get the shelf ready fallout. So I got it for 4 quarters. The 4th quarter doesn't show here. And I just divided it up. And I could see the numbers, but I could do that with the basic spreadsheet. This showed me what materials from our firm and approval shelf ready, those are 2 different types of materials we receive, are where they went and how they compare to each other. And but I decided that what we really wanted to tell was the story of our CAT on receipt and what the impact was on our in-house cataloging workload, the things that we couldn't catalog in acquisitions, what was the relationship. So I found that in order services in this particular time frame, we did a certain number, we cataloged 2,734 and routed 1,532, and we eliminated, that was a lot of duplicates, in that particular process of titles that were shipped for vendors. And another way to present that, I don't know if that's not coming through very well either. Well, another way to present that was that we cataloged in receipt. We found that we routed 44% of what we received, and we received like 50,000 titles a year. But we cataloged 53% of it, and there were 3% overlap. And so then I took that, and we decided to take that figure and then decided to, I can't even read it myself from here, but the catalogers did 71%, and we did the 27 or 28% remaining on an annual basis. So that showed that we were actually doing way more than anybody ever thought, because if we didn't represent it this way, it was just considered those books were all being cataloged by cataloging. So by having everybody track the amount of stuff that they were searching and finding, they do it very minimally. They just look for DLC copy and some member copy that's acceptable. So they have strict criteria. They're not catalogers. And there's some tension to begin with to get the catalogers in your organization to agree to this, but, but I think, it saves them a lot of work, and it would just be a waste of time to put it in the in-process workflow. So that was one thing we showed. Oh, I keep going forward, sorry. Now this is, I talked about Tableau, you saw how scary that was. This was one where we took all the approvals that we counted, the domestic and foreign approvals, and trying to see which language area, and when I say language here, it's not books in these languages necessarily. Emory has a lot of, it's, what do you call them, cultural programs, so it's sort of that culture area and language. But we found that there was a huge difference in our Spanish-Portuguese acquisitions for various reasons. We have a selector who goes on foreign buying trips all over the world in areas that speak those languages, and we just decided to show the differences. So our total approvals overall, we could figure out quarter by quarter there was a huge disparity between the Spanish-Portuguese vendors and the percentages from the whole. So, I'm sorry, I keep doing that. So here was the way that I presented it in the sort of data visualization. So we looked at the Spanish-Portuguese approvals dominate our approval receipts. So there's a scary statement, but it's true. I mean, they were huge. So is that good or is that bad? Sorry. One of the things we did, so we looked at, I mean, you can see quarter by quarter, you can see the sort of the blue-gray color is the Spanish-Portuguese, and then all the other languages and cultures are left over for that was a particular fiscal year for FY16. So basically, the foreign approval plans, they range from 50 to 75%. The dominance was like at least that much for that particular area. So this isn't information, I know I did this all pretty quickly, but this isn't information that we would necessarily have had a couple of years ago. We just had to start looking at what we were doing and making sure that it rose to some kind of prominence. And of course, the whole point of all this is to report up and out. It's like, here we are doing this, and just try to take your hidden work and make it visible. That's kind of what we did. So but the principles going back to the beginning of data analysis are what I was saying before, which are just to, what data am I collecting? What story does it tell, and how do I make it more prominent, and how do I bring out hidden work that isn't covered by traditional metrics? Okay. Thank you.
Great, thanks to all of our speakers. We have a few minutes for some questions for any of the three that are not on a plane somewhere at this point. Let me know and I'll bring the mic to you, and then and also tell me who it's directed to. Everyone's awed and overwhelmed by the brilliance. Okay, great, thank you.
So my question is for Phil from Colorado. I was wondering if in your citation analysis you did this on a like a database, like by database, if you analyzed your citations and the materials you had in your holdings on database, or just at a journal level and then the overlaps?
Do you mean like a Web of Science database?
No, I'm sorry, on the reverse end. So once you had those citations pulled from Web of Science, did you analyze your libraries?
We just sucked it down into a spreadsheet. We did an extraction. I mean, I think the obvious next step would be to like bring it into a database format.
Yeah, like your collection development.
Yes. So I hope to do that soon. I didn't do it in this case, but I think that is like a logical progression for the next step. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Did I see another hand? I thought I did.
This is for Jeff. My name's Heidi. I'm from Pomeek Library at the University of Tennessee at Martin. Jeff, why not just use Google spreadsheets instead of using the Tableau program?
You have to go to a mic or we can't hear you.
Well, actually, as I said, I had to like weasel my way into getting the Tableau access, and I wasn't real happy with what I got because I felt like unless you were a statistical genius, and also the stuff that we count is pretty task and routine-oriented counts. They're not interactive data necessarily. It's just cumulative counts. but we tried to divide it up. I think the Google spreadsheet was more useful, and that is what we still use as our base count. And one of the reasons is that we need to do this by date, because the fiscal quarter, when you're in acquisitions, it's all about finance and the fiscal year and the money. So it's like the fiscal quarter is a real important aspect. So we track everything by date. We start with the date. So we actually use the Google spreadsheet, but I can't display that. I have to take all that data and compile it and then put it into those sort of, well, they're not beautiful, but they're prettier than the Google spreadsheet. You know, those presentation slides.
Great. Anyone else?
Mine's for Phil, too. I'm in the middle of doing a huge citation analysis myself. We don't have Web of Science. I'm using Scopus. Do you have any interest, or does anybody have any interest in trying to develop something like this outside of Web of Science?
I would love to see that happen because it is proprietary, and if you don't have a subscription, then you can't use my methods exactly. And Scopus doesn't do cited reference searching, so I mean that was the first thing I looked at. I don't think the API, their API is not as flexible as say like a web. You can't do it in an API, so you can't do it programmatically. Like you could probably like take the things out manually or semi-manually, but you can't do it like that. It's still going to take forever to do it that way. I'm sorry. I'm really fortunate that I work at a big school that has, you know, the budget to like do the full Web of Science, and I admit that that's definitely one of the drawbacks of, or limitations of what I'm doing, is that maybe not everyone can do it exactly the way I do.
I think that's a great example of sort of what functionality you have as an end user, and then whether that functionality is sort of maximized in the API so it can actually be used in these more powerful ways. Okay, but it sounds like Scopus is more limited at this point, at least, to your knowledge. Yes, we have all the caveat of to my knowledge. Yeah, great. Did you want to add something to that? That one's not working.
One of these slides, which the one I showed you where it had that multivariate thing, that Spanish-Portuguese, there is a Tableau free. You can only do it on iPads and handheld devices. It's not on the web, but it's called Vizable, V-I-Z-A-B-L-E, and it's a free version. And basically, you have to import it as a spreadsheet data as a CSV in the CSV format, not in Excel, for a good reason, because HTML nobody can work with Excel. But anyway. It's a PC product. I can't work with it either. But so it's called Vizable, and it's kind of neat because it allowed me to do that Spanish-Portuguese slide, not the pretty one, but the one that had the data in it, because you just take that CSV source spreadsheet and import it into Vizable on your iPad or something, like I said, and then you play around with the numbers, and it shows you like 40 different views of it, and it allows you to find the right one that tells your story based on the data that you have. And these work really well with just basic statistics. So, like I said, this is not a sophisticated data analytic process.
Great, yeah. Well, sometimes doing the not sophisticated is also powerful, right? Yeah, it doesn't all have to be, we can't all be Phil, so. Anyone else? Well, I want to thank all of our speakers for sharing with us these really creative and innovative ideas that push us beyond thinking about the most obvious things that we can do, and for sharing their insights with us. So join me in a round of applause, please.